Hey everyone. So, have you ever wondered why the Quran has so many abrogations, or what the scholars have called naskh, right? Basically, having to re edit or, strike out the old verse because there's a new verse, there's a new revelation within that 20-year period, like a dot basically in the whole eternal scheme of things. Why does he have so many draft versions of this Quran that is just simply like playing out to the capacity of the people of that time? To test their capacity, and we're gonna, bring this whole eternal book and play it out in their lives, up to their level. And we have to also respect God here. God, the Almighty, All Powerful, Omnipotent God, has to respect essentially their norms and play and push the boundaries within norms. He's so deferent, like he so defers to the Quraysh. This book that is supposed to be the all, perfect, eternal book needs to come down on these people and their level and their Arabic. You need to pray to that direction to really understand it. So let's explore this further. So one of the questions that I actually had and I examined a lot is when I learned more about this whole naskh and abrogations and when I heard of the satanic verse basically, which was like, oh, there was this verse that Allah said to pray to Manat, Al-Uzza and Lat, and and then suddenly changed his mind, like, hey, actually that's shirk. And guess who said that? Shaitan. So, there you go for like the most perfect book. It is well known in the world of tafsir, that's another thing. Like basically for you and I to read the Quran, you basically need a PhD in Arab history and the Arabic and the context and the history and in order to understand this eternal book, this eternal perfect timeless book. That's what you need going in to read it. So let's explore more. What it looked like, when I read the Quran, there's a lot of back and forth. We are, layers. It's kind of like an editing in progress. Like the Quran is coming down according to Muhammad because, this eternal book has to come down with him. He's the living, breathing book, basically, as I say, the author, basically, he's the author. So that's kind of revolving around him and his life and his circumstance and essentially his capacity. But let's look at from the Muslim believers' eyes, how they see it. It's funny because all the Muslim scholars and, this is the most rebuttal you'll get is like actually the old books, the Jews and Christians book, there was a lot of corruption that happened in that book, and that's why we have the final book, the perfect book. So we see the same omissions, abrogations, interpretation mistakes, and apparently a whole satanic verse happening in the Quran as well. So, God kind of didn't get it right still after all these years, after like how many trials and errors, like Yahweh, come on, it's still editing, still having to revise. And now we have with this final book, and he still gives you this version. We say Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Qadir, Al-Qahhar, the omnipotent, the most powerful. And yet he wasn't able to keep his first books, free from corruption, free from abrogations or bad interpretations or human influence. It kind of gives you an idea that God really didn't have a perfect plan. It's not so perfect. That after so many trials and errors, we are still getting the Quran. Let's examine now how the Quran is showing up now. What it seems like this God has been adapting, right? He has to come down at people's level and their capacity, okay? And then he has to keep experimenting with what works, what doesn't, or basically struggling to get the message just right, which essentially crashes with an all, knowing God. This whole, how is he the, most powerful creator of galaxies? One of the interesting things that you can describe is like, surely Allah, the Al-Alim, the all-knowing, would not need to change, the prayer direction from Jerusalem to Mecca, the Kaaba, basically another building, there another temple. But, it's the Meccans are important, and they changed that mid-game for, from like all these centuries ago where he was building his religion. And he's like, you know what? I think I get the signals better here. This is where I catch the Salah vibes better. It's just experimenting with a celestial compass. Another point which a lot of people have brought up is like, the Al-Hakim, the all-knowing, the merciful. He knew that alcohol was never going to be okay for you, right? It was never good. Like, it's so bad. Why was it okay at first? Unless he was also experimenting. He didn't really think people would believe him, or like, is that the image? Like, this almighty Al-Qahar God is so different to the Quraysh. He's like, these people are not going to give up alcohol that easily. Okay, we have to take it away step by step. Nah, yeah, that doesn't sound too powerful. At first, alcohol's okay, no mention of it for a number of years. We have no idea, like nothing. And then in Medina, after some terrible situations that arose because, they were showing up drunk, he said, like, at least come to prayer not drunk, okay? 5 times a day, don't show up drunk. And God here, Al-Alim, didn't know that people would still be drinking alcohol, outside of prayer times and still be having the same issues, the same ruckus, or basically following his injunction, because he said, don't show up to Salah in the masjid when you're drunk. So they're like, well, I am drunk, so I guess I won't show up. So yeah, Allah here forgot to get the verses just right, all those issues. The most intriguing, powerful idea is that his Al-Qadir, the most powerful creator of galaxies, right? He couldn't preserve the Torah and the Injil, the books of like the Christians and the Jews, like, the same God coming up, and he's just now creating another draft version. Tragic, really, how his omnipotence stops at the editing stage. Allah, the Al-Haq, right? His 99 names, Al-Haq, the truth. Yet it just keeps coming in layers, the truth coming down in layers, right? Abrogation after abrogation. No, he didn't mean that. It was a shaitan. It was this, What it gives you the sense is today's eternal law could be tomorrow's footnote, because nothing says timeless truth like patch notes in a holy book. If Allah really is the Al-Kamil, the perfect, the complete, why does his book, that's supposedly been, the final truth after so many experiments and attempts, still read like a messy human error book, right? It still reads like a draft version, really, because if Muhammad lived longer, it probably would have been abrogated a little further. And this draft version of like this perfect al-nur, this like the nur and the Quran is like al-Furqan, the clear. But how it reads? So messy, full of human error like reading, that you need a whole PhD program to really understand it. You need a whole footnotes of cultural situations. You need a whole PhD in Arabic. You need context. You need so much history. You need constant reinterpretation to make it make sense, basically. That's what scholars today, Muslims, are doing, is having to reinterpret it and with all their degrees to make it make sense in today's time. If God is the all-eternal, knowing, clear, merciful, why does he communicate in such a messy way? And he's left you here to basically understand all of this theatrics, and for a book that is eternal and timeless. Why is this communication so poor? What the Quran has is the same trial and error pattern like the earlier books. Basically, what it points out back to is human authorship. This is what it essentially reads. It looks like human error, authorship, influence, needing, having the capacity of that time, of that person, of the situation, and the context. So it's not very eternal and timeless, is it? And what I think about is, if this was a God who wanted to send books, he would have sent a whole series, right? Like here's an updated version, here's an updated version, and here's a much more updated version. It wouldn't seem so limited. These are some of the questions that I went through when I was questioning Islam and really going deeply and examining all my fears. And if this is something that you are going through, I would highly recommend taking my course, where I go into detail about a lot of the conflicts and challenges that I went through, uncovering a lot of the limiting beliefs that I had and how I basically outgrew them, how I evolved beyond that, how I questioned, challenged, and grew, outside of those patterns that are so ingrained in us. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.